somewhere around 12,000 years ago, long before clocks began ticking and towers kissed the sky, humanity lived another kind of life. No cities, no written laws, no borders, just open land, wild rivers, and the breath of wind through ancient trees. The year was roughly 10,000 BCE, though no one called it that. No one carved it into stone. No one knew they stood at the edge of something that would change everything. The earth was colder in some places, greener in others, and humans were wanderers, moving with the seasons, sleeping under stars, drinking from rivers that hadn't yet been named. We lived in small groups, tightly bound by blood and trust. 15, maybe 20 people at a time. No strangers, no masses, just faces you knew, every single day of your life. We hunted when we could, gathered when we had to. Fire was our warmth, stone was our tool, and survival was our rhythm, beat by beat, breath by breath. But don't mistake this for struggle. This was not a life of constant fear. It was a life of deep knowing. We knew every tree, every animal, every sign in the sky. We told stories, painted on cave walls, held hands when it was dark. And when someone died, we grieved. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was humanity. Not lost, not broken, not waiting for something better, but fully alive, at home in the world. It's easy to forget how long we lived this way, how recently the first city rose from the dirt. We think the past is behind us, but most of our story is still buried beneath the soil. So step back with us into the long silence before the noise. Before kings, before war, before the first seeds were planted. Let us walk again in the wild world of 10,000 BCE and remember who we were before we became what we are. Before we go into that history buried under sand, ash, and silence, stories that were never meant to survive, subscribe to Unique History Alive. Because here, the dead don't just whisper, they scream their truth. On this channel, we don't just tell you what happened. We show you why it mattered, who hid the truth, and what the world lost when history was rewritten. From blood-stained temples to banned scrolls, from warrior queens whose names were burned from memory, to emperors erased by their enemies. We breathe life into the past, one uncovered secret at a time.
Long before memory, before kings or calendars, there was only the world, raw, endless, and alive. The earth spun just as it does now, but no one was watching from space. No satellites, no borders drawn in ink. Just wind carving valleys, rivers finding their way to the sea. It is easy to forget how far back the human story goes. How deep our roots run into the soil of time. Because if we rewind the clock, not by centuries, but by tens of thousands of years, we don't find empires. We don't find cathedrals. We don't find the written word. We find footprints in the dust. We find tools shaped by stone. We find a planet untouched by the weight of cities. There were no years. There were only seasons. Winter meant hunger. Spring meant return. Summer meant movement. Autumn meant memory. Time moved like water, not numbers. And the people? They were us. Same bones. Same brains. Same blood. But they lived in a different world entirely. There were no farms, no fences, no books, no permanent shelters, no metal, no glass, no wheels. Yet somehow, life thrived. People survived by knowing the land, not ruling it. They tracked herds by footprints, knew the weather by scent and sky, recognized which mushrooms healed and which ones killed. And when the wind changed, they moved. Not because they were lost, but because the land whispered that it was time. This wasn't just instinct. It was intelligence born from observation, carried in stories, passed through generations without ink or paper. They didn't build cities, but they built memories. They didn't pave roads, but they mapped the stars. They didn't have kings, but they had elders, and firelight, and stories that lived longer than the people who told them. The world itself looked different. Great sheets of ice were melting away from the north. Vast tundras and towering forests opened like books across the earth. Animals we no longer see, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, mammoths, roamed the land freely. And humans, small in number but vast in spirit, walked through this world with spears in hand, and the past at their backs. They built no monuments, but their lives were monuments to survival, to curiosity, to endurance. This was the world before civilization, before agriculture, before writing, before cities rose from the ground. And yet, this world shaped us. In silence, in movement, in patience. For thousands of generations, this was the only way to live. To move with the earth. Not to rule it, but to walk beside it. It was not a golden age. It was hard. There was danger. There was death. But there was also balance. And in that balance, we became human. We were not always what we are now. Our story begins far earlier than cities. Earlier than farming. Earlier than even firelight and myth. To understand who we were in 10,000 BCE, we must go back even further. To the moment when we first became us. The ice had ruled for thousands of years. But now, the world was beginning to shift. Not all at once. Not with thunder or fire. But with something quieter, a slow, steady warmth. The great glacier that had once stretched across continents began to retreat. Mountains reappeared from under the snow. Rivers ran stronger. Forests spread like green fire across the land. This was not just a change in climate. This was the beginning of a revolution. Not built by kings, but by seeds. As the world warmed around 10,000 BCE, land that had once been frozen or barren suddenly blossomed with life. New plants, new animals, new chances. Wild grasses took root across fertile valleys. Not in patches, but in great, sweeping blankets of green. Wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas. They grew wild, thick, and easy to reach. For generations, people had gathered them. But now, something felt different. There was more. More than they could carry. More than they could consume. They had always followed food. But now, the food didn't move. The idea was small. A whisper, really. But it would change everything. What if we stayed? Not forever. Not yet. Just a little longer. One more season. One more harvest. They noticed the patterns. Where the seeds fell, more plants grew. Where the ground was soft, roots ran deeper. Where the animals returned, the land was rich. They weren't planning the future. They were reading the present. Learning, without even knowing it, how to cultivate the world. This was not farming yet. It was curiosity. It was observation. And slowly, it became something more. In the Fertile Crescent, across parts of what is now Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Palestine, and Iran, wild grains grew in dense clusters. By rivers like the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Jordan, the soil was rich, the water near, the game plentiful. People paused. Then they came back. Then they built something small. A shelter. A store of seeds. A fire pit that stayed lit. This was not a decision. It was a response. To abundance. To possibility. To a future that was beginning to take shape. From movement came the first stillness. They stayed long enough to notice. Long enough to wonder. Long enough to begin shaping the land. As it had always shaped them. It didn't happen everywhere. It didn't happen fast. But in some places, the world had become so rich, so dependable, that people stopped chasing it. And for the first time, the land waited for them. Homo sapiens, the wise human. We emerged nearly 300,000 years ago. In the vast savannas and highlands of Africa. We were not alone. There were others, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and older cousins now lost to time. But we were different. We stood taller. Our brains, more flexible. Our communication, more layered, full of emotion, memory, warning, and hope. We were not just reacting to the world. We were beginning to understand it. We learned to walk great distances upright. To make tools that could be sharpened, reused, improved. To control fire. Not just to cook food, but to hold back the darkness. And slowly, across thousands of years, we spread. From the heart of Africa, we moved outward. Along rivers, through forests, across grasslands and deserts. Into Arabia. Into Asia. Into Europe. Eventually, into every corner of the earth. We adapted. To snow. To sea. To mountain and plain. The Ice Age challenged everything. Glacier rolled down from the north, covering lands in silence and frost. In many places, life was barely possible. But we learned. We watched animal migrations. We memorized plant cycles. We created layered clothing from fur and hide. We invented weapons of wood, bone, and sharpened stone. We began to see patterns. And that changed everything. Around 50,000 years ago, something stirred in us. A turning point. Our tools became more precise. Our shelters stronger. Our minds more symbolic. We started painting, on walls, on stone, even on each other. Not just for survival, but to remember. To say, I was here. To whisper something eternal. We buried our dead with care, placing shells, ochre, or tools beside them. Signs of belief. Of ritual. Of grief. This was the dawn of behavioral modernity. When we began thinking beyond the moment. And as the world froze and thawed, we stayed in motion. By 20,000 years ago, our ancestors had reached almost every type of landscape the earth could offer. Tundra, jungle, desert, coast, mountain. Each place shaped them differently. In the north, they hunted reindeer and mammoth. In the forests, they gathered berries, hunted deer, fished icy rivers. By the sea, they learned tides, built rafts, harvested shellfish and seals. And their tools evolved with the land. Barbed harpoons for fishing, atlatls to throw spears farther, bone needles to stitch tight clothing, baskets to carry food, traps to capture game. What looks like simplicity to us was actually the result of endless trial, failure, and knowledge passed on. They didn't have agriculture yet, but they understood nature deeply, knew how to take without destroying, how to wait, how to move on and return only when the land had healed. This was not chaos. This was not guessing. This was a living science, rooted in land, weather, and time. And everywhere they went, they carried stories. Stories that tied them to each other, to the land, to the animals, to the night sky. They watched the stars not to conquer them, but to follow them, to understand migration, time, and direction. Long before telescopes, our ancestors were already reading the heavens, with nothing but eyes and memory. We call them hunter-gatherers, but they were more than that. They were geologists, botanists, physicists, engineers, navigators, poets, parents, and for hundreds of thousands of years, this was the world they shaped. A world without cities, but full of meaning. No coins, no palaces, no cathedrals, but there were truths, etched into stone, spoken by fire, woven into the rhythm of walking feet. And as the Ice Age finally began to melt, something new started growing in the warmth. Before the first seeds were planted with intention, before the first walls rose from mud and stone, humanity had already reached a kind of peak, not measured in monuments or wealth, but in knowledge of the land, of the animals, of each other. By around 10,000 BCE, hunter-gatherers across the world had fine-tuned a way of life that was highly adapted, deeply sustainable, and profoundly intelligent. They weren't struggling through chaos. They were thriving through rhythm. They knew when the caribou would pass. They knew where berries ripened first. They knew how to walk barefoot across hot sand without burning their souls. They knew how to disappear into a forest without breaking a twig. Their tools were elegant in their simplicity, sharp, durable, effective. Their shelters quick to build, quick to abandon. They carried only what mattered. They moved with the world, not against it. Where we see emptiness, they saw patterns. Where we see wilderness, they saw home. Their societies were small, but rich in connection. Kinship held everything together. There were no prisons, no palaces, no taxes, no thrones. Just shared meals, shared dangers, shared decisions. The old taught the young. The young carried the fire forward. Stories passed down were not just entertainment. They were maps of seasons, animals, dangers, and spirit. There was time for laughter, time for song, even time for rest. Modern research shows that many hunter-gatherer groups had more free time than early farmers, and they used it to create, to decorate tools, to carve, to drum, to dance. We think of them as simple, but they were artists, philosophers, guardians of oral libraries. Spirit was everywhere, in the rain, in the fire, in the breath of an animal just before the hunt. The line between the living and the sacred was thin. When they killed, they gave thanks. When they ate, they remembered. When they lost someone, they grieved together. And sometimes, they left signs, stones, carvings, patterns, to speak for the dead. They didn't build temples. The earth was their temple. But nothing stays the same. In some places, abundance began to change things. There was more to eat. More children survived. Groups grew larger. And with more people came pressure. Pressure on local resources. Pressure between groups. Pressure to stay longer in places once only passed through. What had once been movement began to slow. And just as the earth had shifted out of the ice, humanity began to shift toward a new way of life. Not because they were failing, but because they had succeeded. They didn't set out to invent farming. No one woke up and said, "Today, we stop roaming." It didn't begin with a grand plan, but with small, quiet changes. A dropped seed. A patch of grain growing where none had been before. A family staying in one valley just a little longer each year. This was not a leap. It was a slow turning. But once the wheel began to move, the world would never be the same. By around 10,000 to 8,000 BCE, in scattered places like the Fertile Crescent, the first signs of farming began to take root. People had always gathered wild grains, but now they started to help them grow. They broke soil with sticks, cleared away weeds, carried water, scattered seeds. What had once been harvest was becoming cultivation. Grasses like wheat and barley, once fragile and scattered, grew stronger, thicker, more predictable. Over time, they changed. Not by design, but through use, through habit. Plants that dropped their seeds too easily were lost. Those that held on long enough to be carried, stored, or replanted survived. That's domestication. Nature shaped by human hands. But it wasn't just the plants. Animals began to change too. First came the dog, not hunted, but welcomed. Drawn by scraps, warmth, and companionship. Wolves began living near camps. The boldest were tolerated. The gentlest were fed. And slowly, generation by generation, the wolf became the dog. Guardian, partner, friend. Then came others. Goats, sheep, cattle, pigs. At first, hunted. Then herded. Then kept. Tamed animals meant more than food. They offered milk, hides, bone tools, and eventually, labor. This was another kind of revolution. One not shouted, but whispered. A shift in the balance between humans and the wild. With farming came settlement. No longer needing to chase food. People began to build in place. They made homes from mud brick and timber. Built storage pits and stone hearths. Formed clusters of families around fertile ground. These weren't cities. Not yet. But they were permanent. And permanence changed everything. The rhythm of life shifted. People measured time not by migration, but by harvest. Seeds meant planning. Livestock meant defense. Shelters meant ownership. New technologies followed. Pottery, to store grain. Grindstones, to turn seeds into flour. Hoes and digging sticks, shaped for breaking soil. Even the diet began to change. From wild variety to simple staples, grains, legumes, milk. This came with cost. Less mobility, more disease from close living, more labor. Farming was not easy. But the trade-off was clear. Predictability, a steady food supply, longer stays, more births, more children surviving. The population began to grow. And with it, so did the need to organize space, to share tasks, to manage. From fire circles to farming villages, a new chapter had begun. It wasn't faster or easier, but it was steadier. And that steadiness planted more than crops. It planted the roots of civilization. The earth was no longer just followed. It was tended. It was changed. The wild was no longer a path. It was becoming a border. And humanity was beginning to draw lines in the soil. Farming didn't just change how we ate. It changed how we lived. And with time, how we thought. What began as a few scattered fields and shelters grew into something the world had never seen. The first settled communities, villages. And soon after, towns. This was the slow birth of civilization. Not from war. Not from conquest. But from abundance and pressure. Farming brought more food than ever before. And for the first time in human history, not everyone needed to hunt or gather. Some began storing food. Others began shaping tools. A few began focusing only on one thing, and doing it very well. This was specialization. The moment humans began dividing their time and talents. One person made baskets. Another shaped pots. One watched the skies. Another guarded the animals. With different roles came different values. And with that, the first signs of social layers. In the hunter-gatherer world, equality had been easier. You shared what you found, or no one ate. But now, some had more. More grain, more land, more animals, more time. And with time came influence. Leaders began to emerge. Not just elders, but organizers. People who planned harvests, managed water, kept track of stores, or claimed connection to the spirits and skies. Not kings, yet, but the first hints of hierarchy. The earliest true villages were small, maybe 100 people. But they were permanent. Mud brick walls, stone-lined hearths, communal spaces for cooking, working, gathering. These weren't random clusters of huts. They were designed, even if simply. Paths formed between homes. Fields stretched beyond. Livestock were penned nearby. Time was now tracked by the moon, the stars, the crops. Memory stayed in one place. You no longer passed stories while walking. You carved them into stone walls, painted them on pottery. The village became a center, not just of survival, but of culture. New tools followed. Clay was shaped into pottery, not just for cooking, but for storing grain, seeds, water, oil. Heavy grinding stones replaced small handheld tools. Permanent homes required stronger architecture. Weavers wove textiles from flax and wool. Spindles spun thread. Looms came next. Each tool told a story of change. A story of settled life. But civilization came with its own burdens. Life in early towns was harder in some ways. Farming required long, repetitive work. Clearing land, planting, weeding, harvesting. It was back-breaking. And unlike hunting, it was constant. Diets shifted from diverse wild foods to mostly grain with less variety. Health declined in some areas. Teeth weakened. Bones became thinner. Diseases, previously rare, began to spread. Why? Because now, people lived closer together. In one place. With waste. With animals. Viruses that had no home before. Found one in the stillness of early settlements. Childbirth became more frequent. More food meant more children. More children meant more mouths. And more mouths meant more need to farm. This was the cycle. Food growth, labor, more food, more growth. And with it, pressure. Some groups pushed into new land. Others began to defend what they had. For the first time, people weren't just living with the land. They were beginning to compete for it. Walls began to rise. Not just to keep animals in, but to keep others out. By around 7,500 to 6,000 BCE. In places like Catalhoyuk, modern Turkey, and Jericho, modern Palestine, villages were growing larger. Dozens of homes. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of people. The architecture was now layered. Some homes shared walls. Roofs served as pathways. There were platforms for ritual. Painted walls. Buried ancestors beneath the floorboards. This wasn't just living. This was belonging. This was identity. You weren't just from a family. You were from a place. That was new. In Jericho, we find a tower, stone-built, circular, massive. Next to it, a wall. Not for animals, but for defense. In Catalhoyuk, we see art, leopards, goddesses, bulls, painted in rich colors. Displayed with pride. We see shrines, altars, elaborate burials. Belief systems were forming, not just to understand the world, but to order it. Some people began to control these beliefs, becoming spiritual leaders, ritual guides, early priests. Spiritual authority slowly joined practical authority. And from that, the idea of power began to take shape. Towns didn't remain isolated. By 6000 BCE, a village was no longer just a home. It was a system of roles, rules, rituals. And it was growing. More births, more storage, more specialization, more defense, more ceremony. Everything was moving toward something larger, more complex, more fragile, more powerful. The city was still centuries away, but its seeds were already in the ground. We live in cities now. We eat food grown by strangers. We walk on pavement and sleep behind walls. But deep inside us, beneath the screens, the systems, the structures, there's still something ancient. A rhythm. A memory. A pull toward something we once were. We didn't lose our past. We buried it beneath layers of time. But the roots remain. Our world has changed more in the last 12,000 years than in the 200,000 before it. And yet, our bodies haven't caught up. We still have the instincts of hunter-gatherers. Our eyes still scan for movement. Our brains still crave sugar and fat, once rare, now everywhere. We're still wired for bursts of speed, not hours at a desk. We were built to walk long distances, not to sit in chairs. To sleep when it gets dark. not under blue screens at midnight. Anxiety, burnout, chronic fatigue. So many of today's problems may not be dysfunctions, but symptoms of a world we were never designed for. Hunter-gatherer groups were small, 15 to 30 people. Everyone mattered. Everyone had a role. You knew each voice, each face, each laugh. Now, we navigate crowds of thousands. We follow people we've never met. We scroll through conflict we can't resolve. Our minds are still tribal, hardwired to connect deeply, to protect our group, to fear outsiders. But our world is no longer tribal. It's global. And that gap between instinct and environment has left us overwhelmed. We long for belonging, for eye contact, for meaning, things our ancestors had by default, and we now seek out like fire in the dark. Though many hunter-gatherer societies faded with the rise of agriculture, they left more than ruins. They left lessons. Sustainability wasn't a choice, it was a condition. You lived by what the land gave. If you took too much, the land pushed back. Knowledge of ecosystems wasn't academic. It was intimate. You didn't study the forest. You were part of it. Hunter-gatherers knew the difference between harvesting and harming. They rotated gathering sites. They hunted selectively. They moved so the land could recover. Today, as we face ecological collapse, that memory of balance, of restraint, feels more vital than ever. There were no stockpiles, no hoarding, no profit margins. Abundance meant sharing, not selling. Not because they were saints, but because they understood something simple. In a small group, your survival depends on others. Modern systems reward accumulation. Ancient systems punished it. It's a hard truth. Progress gave us many things, but it also took away a way of thinking, a sense of mutual need. Our ancestors didn't build temples out of stone. Their temples were rivers, trees, mountains, skies. They practiced animism, the belief that everything has spirit. Not just people, but animals, rocks, wind, fire. This wasn't a religion. It was a relationship, a way of walking through the world with reverence. Every hunt began with ritual. Every fire had meaning. Every death was acknowledged. We've replaced ritual with convenience, reverence with control. But that old language, the way of seeing the sacred in the ordinary, still stirs in our bones. We feel it when we stand beneath a storm, when we touch ancient stone, when we're alone in the forest, and feel the silence pressing back. We haven't forgotten the sacred. We've just forgotten how to speak to it. Every year, we dig up more traces of this lost world. Stone tools, carved figurines, bone flutes, charcoal from fire pits, tiny footprints hardened in clay. We find them in caves, riverbeds, valleys, deserts. And each one tells a story. A child playing, a woman grinding seed, a man shaping a blade. These weren't nameless, faceless people. They were mothers, fathers, siblings, lovers, dreamers. We read their world in fragments, but they lived it in full color. Their tools weren't primitive. They were perfect for their time. Their lives weren't empty. They were full of purpose, of presence, of connection. Once agriculture began, there was no turning back. Farms required land. Land required boundaries. Boundaries required enforcement. Surplus led to storage. Storage led to ownership. Ownership led to hierarchy. Hierarchy led to power. Power led to cities. And cities led to us. It was a spiral. Gradual. Relentless. The nomadic world didn't vanish overnight. In many parts of the world, it held on for centuries. But the momentum had shifted. Stillness became the new strategy. And civilization, once it gained momentum, never looked back. We carry the past with us, not just in history books, but in every cell of our body. Our cravings, our fears, our joy around firelight, our love of music, rhythm, storytelling. All of it, hunter-gatherer memory. And maybe that's why we hike into forests. Why we stare at the stars. Why we build campfires on weekends. Why we garden, even in tiny city yards. Why we ache for silence. Why we keep looking for meaning. In a world that moves too fast. Because a part of us remembers when we moved with the land. Not through it. This isn't just history. It's a mirror of who we were, of who we still are, and maybe of who we might become again. The hunter-gatherer world was not a golden age, but it was a time of balance, of closeness, of deep knowledge, born not in books, but in lived experience. As we face a future of environmental collapse, social isolation, and spiritual confusion, we don't need to return to the Stone Age. But we might need to remember it. Not with nostalgia, but with respect. Because long before cities, long before kings and gods and armies and steel, we learned how to be human. And we did it without cities. 12,000 years ago, we stood at the edge of a decision, and we stepped into a future we didn't understand. We stopped moving. We built walls. We grew roots in one place and called it progress. But something was left behind. A silence. A wildness. A truth we've been running from ever since. We became farmers. Then builders, then rulers, then machines. We created more than the world had ever seen. But with every step forward, we lost something. The land we once listened to, we now strip. The rivers that fed us, we poison. The skies we watched in awe, we flood with noise and smoke. We don't know the seasons anymore. We know deadlines. We don't hear the wind. We hear engines. We don't sit by firelight telling stories. We scroll in silence through screens. We are advanced. But are we better? We left behind the life that made us. And now we're trying to remember it. Not because we want to go back, but because we've gone too far. And in the cracks of this collapsing world, something ancient is whispering again. It's in the hunger for meaning, in the ache for real connection, in the quiet voice asking, what have we become? This isn't just history. This is a warning. Because we may have built the world, but we forgot how to belong to it. And if we don't remember soon, the earth will go on without us.
What you just watched wasn't just history. It was a voice that refused to be forgotten. And there are so many more waiting to be heard. So if you felt something today, If the past reached out and touched you, then don't let it fade. Subscribe to Unique History Alive and walk with us, one buried truth at a time. Because history isn't dead. It's just been waiting for someone like you